People in England don't feel safe anymore. And I know that that might sound like an exaggeration. It might sound like I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not. Last night, I received multiple messages from friends, mostly, in fact, entirely female friends, who said that they don't feel safe anymore. They're panicking. They're worried. One was particularly tragic. It's a friend of mine who lives in London, and she said that she does not feel safe leaving her own home. And it got even worse than that, because she was saying, I had planned to get out of this country. I'd planned to emigrate, but unfortunately, a family member has become really ill and I feel like I can't leave anymore. So I just feel trapped and depressed and scared that I have to stay here in England, particularly in London. How have we got to this point? Now, there's a very limited amount that I can say about the incident from yesterday because I don't really want to get arrested for contempt of court. But what we do know is that 10 people were attacked on a train whilst it was moving. 2 suspects have been arrested, both black British, born in Britain, so just as British as you and me, of course. And the police are saying that this is not any kind of terror-related incident. And I was thinking about that. Not terror-related. What does that mean? So clearly, you know, for the victims who were there, it feels just as horrifying regardless of what the motive is, but not terror-related. In some ways, that's a little bit scarier, isn't it? Because it means that there are people in this country who will attack you and potentially take your life, and they don't even have like a religious, zealot, extremist motivation for doing so anymore. That, to me, is actually somehow more terrifying than if it were terror-related, because at least in the latter case, we can kind of understand and try to rationalize what's going on here. But if it's just criminality, how are we meant to get our heads around that? How are we meant to process this new level of danger that we seem to find ourselves in? Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I want to drive home a point that I made in my last video before this incident took place, because it's just becoming even more persuasive and necessary. And in order to do so, I want you to listen to one of the survivors' testimonies. So I'm going to play you a clip, and it's a guy who was on the train, and there's nothing descriptive or graphic in what he says here, but there's a really important point that I think we all need to get our heads around and understand. Have a listen.
I was in Coach H. I was literally just listening to Audible on my phone. And then I had guys suddenly run past going, run, run. And while we're doing that, there's a person that I know, and he's kind of looked at me and gone like, have you got anything we can use in case he comes through?
There's at least 10 ambulances, 12 ambulances.
We had a Jack Daniels bottle between us and that was it. So we're kind of sitting there with one Jack Daniels bottle, just looking down the end of this carriage, just praying somebody doesn't walk down with a knife, with a gun. We didn't really know what was going on.
Picture that moment where you are trapped on a moving train and there's only so many carriages you can walk down. There's only so far that you can go, and you get there and there's loads of you all huddled together, and your mate looks at you and he says, have you got anything we can use? Have you got anything we can use to defend ourselves? And you're rummaging around in your little shopping bag and all you can find is a bottle of Jack Daniels. And to be honest, that's actually pretty good by British standards. I think it's completely unacceptable where you can be in that kind of situation. Your life could well be taken from you at any given moment, but the British state has not allowed you any means whatsoever to defend yourself. Nothing. There is nothing legally that you could have had on you in your possession for the purpose of self-defense that the British state would have allowed you to have. That's unacceptable. We're entering clearly a period of chaos and terror and criminality, and the British state will not allow you to have anything that could protect your life. And this is a conversation that is going to become more and more frequent. So let's get ahead of it. There's a whole range of possibilities here, right? It doesn't have to be firearms, although of course that is one possibility. There are other things too. What about tasers? They're non-lethal for the most part. Okay, for the most part. But the one I really want to drive home, because I cannot fathom why this is outlawed in Britain, is pepper spray. Why is it illegal to own pepper spray in this country for the purposes of self-defense? Now picture yourself back on that train It's an enclosed space. You can't get off. The train is moving, but you do have pepper spray. If someone comes through that carriage and they come meaning to do you and the people around you harm, pepper spray could well save your life. Let me just get ahead of a couple of the counter arguments here, because I know what people are going to say. They'll say, oh, I don't think we can trust people with pepper spray. People will misuse the pepper spray. Look, misusing the pepper spray would still be a crime, right? So if you have pepper spray and you deliberately misuse it, that's assault. In fact, it's assault with a weapon, so potentially you're looking at 1, 2, 3 years in prison. We're not saying that misusing something would no longer be a crime. We're not saying that if we legalise pepper spray, anyone who uses it in a bad way, well, that's legal because pepper spray is legal. No, of course not. Knives are legal to own if you're just trying to chop up a steak, right? But they're not legal for the purposes of going out and committing horrible attacks. So yes, we can legalise pepper spray and we can still criminalise the bad actors who use it irresponsibly. But the mere fact that there are bad actors out there is simply no justification whatsoever to leave the vast majority of the law-abiding, good British public with no criminal record absolutely no means to defend themselves in this country should something terrible happen to them, as we're seeing more and more often. The fact that there are bad actors does not mean that we cannot allow good actors at least the bare minimum possibility of defending themselves and their loved ones. I think that is just a ridiculous suggestion. So look, I'm going to talk to Rupert Lowe. I'm going to send him a private message because he does follow me on Twitter for some reason. I'm going to send him a private message, and I think this is one of the things that Restore Britain should be campaigning on. Now, they have already come out and said that we should legalise pepper spray, but I actually think not only should they say it, this should be one of the things that they're focusing on, that they are prioritising, because this is exactly the kind of thing that could save British lives. I absolutely do believe that. Again, put yourself back into that train carriage where you're there, it's very narrow, very channeled, the train is moving, you can't get off. If someone comes through that door, at least you can pepper spray them. Then you've blinded them, they can't see. It's temporary, it's non-lethal, it doesn't do any lasting damage, but it's potentially just enough time for you to go and then disarm them and save lives. Why wouldn't we allow the British public that opportunity? Let me finish by saying this. A lot of people in this country still seem to believe that Britain is a high trust society. And because it's a high trust society, the native population don't actually need any means whatsoever of defending themselves. And to those people, I would just say, how many incidents do you need to see of people just going about their ordinary lives, walking the dog, catching a train, whatever it might be, and then suddenly finding themselves in a position of mortal peril, often losing their lives, and there is literally nothing they can do about it because the state has not given them the means to defend themselves? How many times does that have to happen before you reconsider that perspective? And let me add, I'm not going to pretend for a second that Britain back in the 1980s or the 1970s was perfectly safe and nothing went wrong, because that's not true. I mean, back then people were worried about the IRA, right? So you could just be walking down a street in London and the IRA has put a car full of explosives right there, and that's it, okay? People were scared back then for different reasons, but here's the difference. Back then, when people were worried about the IRA, there is nothing that you could have done feasibly to defend yourself, because there's just a whole street of cars, you're not really thinking about it, and then terrible, awful, truly tragic. But that's not what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with these more personal situations. I mean, there've been 3 major knife-related incidents of completely innocent people being the victims in the last, I think, month, but if not 5 or 6 weeks. In these situations, you can do something about that, because it's like a slow motion danger compared to a car packed full of explosives. You have time to think, time to react, time to do something. But the reason you can't do anything about it is because the state won't let you, because the state has not given you the permission that you need to defend yourself. Look, I really will leave it there. I've debated whether or not I was going to make a video about this topic. I thought that I would, because I hope some people see it and they understand that there is something we can do, namely pepper spray or other means of self-defense. There is something we can do to prevent or minimize these attacks and these terrible situations in the future and try and save lives. So that's why I've made a video. But will I make videos every time this happens in the future? Probably not, because I think it's going to keep happening, unfortunately. And I don't really want the channel to just be purely inundated with the terrible news that is endlessly coming out of Britain, right? Not good for you, but also not really good for me. I'd rather talk about some broader political points. I will say this as well. This kind of news story would have been like front page coverage for a month if you go back 20 years. But I guarantee within 3 days, most news stations will be talking about hedgerows or something, because people have become desensitized to it. As this starts to ramp up, and it'll happen more and more and more in the future, people just become desensitized to it, which is awful. Like, well, we shouldn't have to live in a society where we're desensitized to the tragedy of 10 people being attacked, or Wayne Broadhurst being attacked whilst walking his dog, or 2 people going to a place of worship getting attacked. You know, we shouldn't become desensitized to these things, but we are. Like, anyway, I really will leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Please do leave a like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in a future video. Thank you very much.